Next on our agenda, we will welcome Representative Emma Greenman and House File 76. Welcome to committee. Go ahead, get yourself settled, and while that's going on, I will move that House File 76 be re-referred to the General Register. And I will request a roll call. With that, let's see, I see that there is an A1 amendment, so I'll go ahead and move the A1. Any questions or discussion on the A1? Did you want to describe the amendment, Representative Greenman?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's nice to be back. It's nice to hear about the progress of MNCFA. It's nice to be back in energy, my first time this session. The amendment, what it does is it's based on stakeholder feedback. This bill was dropped last year, and we have heard and learned from the rate case and other things, so it just amends and makes a clear administratable rule out of the bill.
Great. With that, all those in favor of the A1 say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion prevails, and the amendment is adopted. So, Representative Greenman, please tell us about your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. House File 76 is a simple bill that limits the amount of executive compensation that investor-owned utilities can charge back to Minnesota ratepayers. It caps the amount they can charge ratepayers for compensation of their top 10 highest executives at the salary of the Minnesota's chief executive, our governor. Customers pay for utility services, not for executive compensation packages. As utility bills rise for folks across the state, this bill protects Minnesota ratepayers from being nickeled and dimed by private investor-owned monopolies to pay for lavish compensation for their CEOs. And to be clear, this bill wouldn't impact the executive compensation and how much they make. It only impacts the amount of compensation that's put on customer bills and how much is funded by company shareholders. And this isn't a hypothetical problem. Investor-owned utilities are making big profits at the same time as they are trying to charge Minnesota customers millions of dollars for their CEOs and C-suites. In 2025, Xcel made $2.2 billion in profits and sought to charge Minnesota ratepayers $7.3 million for its highest paid executives. And in 2026, it is seeking $7.6 million. And for anybody who says this bill isn't necessary, tell that to the Minnesota families who are struggling to pay their gas and electric bills. Minnesotans are on the hook while these executives of these investor-owned utilities make millions each year. Xcel Chairman, President, and CEO made $13 million in 2024, the last time we have on record of their salary, and the rest of the C-suite made between $2.5 and $4 million respectively. CenterPoint CEO made $12 million, Minnesota Power Light CEO made $3.7 million, and it goes on. Rest assured that these CEOs won't struggle to pay their utilities or groceries if this bill passes. But for Minnesotans who are struggling, this bill will be a piece of helping them afford their utility bills and their lives. Regulators recognize this issue, and the PUC took action to address it in its rate case with Xcel. And after Xcel challenged it and the court ordered additional process, the PUC recently issued an order capping Xcel's recoverable compensation at $150,000, which was the governor's salary at the time the rate case commenced. The PUC reasoned that the governor's salary acts as a proxy for what is considered reasonable executive compensation in the public interest. And while I'm encouraged to see the PUC tackling this issue with the regulatory tools we have, it's our responsibility as policymakers to ensure that we're protecting Minnesotans and ratepayers in this regulated monopoly utility system that we set up. And that's what this bill does. It establishes a fair and bright line rule for all recovery, for all large investor-owned utilities and their recovery. And it indexes it to the governor's salary as set by law. So as that increases, this bill will follow that. The bill is just common sense. Why should Minnesota ratepayers be on the hook for paying more to a private for-profit executive than to our own chief executive that voters get to elect, who run our entire state? It just makes sense. And so with that, Madam Chair, I'd ask for member support, and I believe we have some testifiers.
Yeah, so before we do questions, we'll hear from our testifiers. First, we have Andrea Sorum. Welcome to committee. Go ahead and get yourself seated. introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Chair Acomb, Chair Swedinsky, and committee members, my name is Andrea Sorum. I'm a Minneapolis resident and mom to two teenage boys, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the poor in our state. In 2022, I experienced post-viral illness after a COVID infection, and I've been sick with long COVID ever since. I lost all my savings, I lost my career, and even my home is in foreclosure because of this illness. And for the last 4 years, while I've slowly recovered, I've lived with scarcity and fear, while I did not have enough to pay for the basic necessities of life for 2 kids and a mom, for our housing, for our transportation, for our food, and our heat bill and electric bill. I just got a letter this week from Excel saying that they're going to increase rates 8%, or they're proposing an 8% raise. And for me, that sent a wave of terror through my body. For those of us who are experiencing economic stress, it is important to make sure the precious dollars that we pay for essentials like public utilities are as low as possible. No money from a ratepayer like me should go to line the pockets of already wealthy business owners. Please pass HF 76 to make sure ratepayer dollars are not used to further enrich already wealthy utility executives. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sorum. Appreciate you sharing. Next, we have Mitch Diddleson. Welcome to committee. Go ahead and get yourself settled, introduce yourself for the record, and then proceed.
Chair Acomb, Co-Chair Swedzinski, and members of the committee. My name is Mitch Ditlefson. First of all, happy St. Patrick's Day. I was able to go to the Landmark Center and watch some traditional Irish music, eat some corned beef and cabbage this morning. St. Paul's a wonderful city for Irish traditions. And also, I saw your robin socks. I was sitting behind you there. Representative, spring is close. So my name is Mitch Ditlefson. I reside in Minneapolis. I cook Juicy Lucy's over at Matt's Bar on the south side. I spend most of the rest of my time eating, shopping, and recreating in the city. One thing that I deeply cherish about Minneapolis is that there's seemingly endless options to choose from to buy local. I get my shoes from Nokoma's shoe store. I buy my bacon at Everett's. I go to Cheapo for my CDs. I get donuts at Bogart's. I work local and I buy local. But I don't have the option to buy local for my energy. And sure, Xcel Energy is based here in Minnesota, but there's not another utility company that I get to choose from to source my energy. My only option is a Fortune 500 corporation that profits billions of dollars per year by being a monopoly over a basic human need. And life is getting expensive. Gas is up over 50 cents a gallon just in the last week. Grocery prices never go down, and the same is true for our energy at Xcel. In times like these, where the average working person, like myself, is being financially pinched in every direction, I want my hard-earned dollars to count. So it goes back to my ethos of buying local. It's not always cheaper, but it directly supports the community that supports me back. I read that Bob Frenzel made $12.94 million in 2024, which happens to be about $12.9 million more than I made in 2024. Allowing a monopoly like Xcel to use the profits from working-class Minnesotans to pay the exorbitant salaries of their C-suite executives, it feels disrespectful to our hard-earned paychecks. Please pass this bill to give relief to Minnesotans and ensure that our money isn't going towards wasteful spending. We can get by on less than $13 million per year. Thank you, committee.
Thank you, Mr. Diddleson. Next, we have Carly Weinman from Energy and Policy Institute. Welcome to committee, Ms. Weinman. Please get yourself comfortable, introduce yourself for the record, and proceed.
Good afternoon, Chair Acomb, Co-Chair Swedzinski, and committee members. My name is Carly Weinman, and I'm a Research and Communications Manager at the Energy and Policy Institute. EPI is a national utility watchdog organization, but I live in Minnesota, and much of my research focuses on investor-owned utilities operating in our state. I'm very proud of that. I have provided expert testimony in 2 recent Minnesota rate cases, including on the issue of cost recovery of executive compensation. I'm here today to testify in support of House File 76, which ensures that ratepayers are no longer required to subsidize excessive executive compensation at monopoly utilities. This legislation is responsive to an issue that surfaces routinely in Minnesota rate cases. In Xcel's ongoing electric rate case, an astonishing 8,600 public comments have been submitted to the record so far. Many of those specifically emphasize opposition to exorbitant corporate profits and bloated executive pay. I heard this morning from the Citizens Utility Board of Minnesota in a presentation delivered to the Public Utilities Commission that roughly 20% of the 4,000 or so comments they've analyzed relate to the issue of executive compensation. This is not a new concern. Previous rate cases across utilities have drawn public comments that reveal ratepayers' distrust and negative perceptions of their utilities based on this issue of executive compensation. Rate case after rate case, we see the same. House File 76 offers a straightforward, common sense solution. This legislation comes at a pivotal time when ratepayers are grappling with a growing affordability crisis. It is important to underscore that utilities operate as monopolies and that their ratepayers are captive customers. If a ratepayer is unhappy with the way their utility operates, they cannot simply choose to take their business elsewhere. It's up to policymakers to safeguard ratepayers' interests and to ensure that adequate statutory guidelines are in place to do so. Crucially, this legislation would in no way restrict a utility's ability to compensate its executives at whatever level it deems appropriate. Any utility could still pay any of its employees at any level of its choosing, using financial resources other than ratepayer money. A utility could, for instance, shift executive compensation costs to shareholders who have broadly enjoyed rising profits over recent years. Xcel, for example, as you've heard, reported $2.2 billion in profits for 2025. It has reported profits in excess of $1 billion each year since 2015. CenterPoint also cleared $1 billion in profits last year. But it's not just about the vast sums of money these utilities generate for their shareholders. It is also the case that executives at investor-owned utilities have an obligation to act in shareholders' interests. They have a fiduciary duty of care to their shareholders and act in shareholders' interests accordingly. That is evident on every earnings call and in every shareholder report. There is not an analogous duty enshrined to ratepayers. Additionally, while ratepayers have no direct mechanism to influence utility executive pay, shareholders do have the privilege of taking an advisory vote on executive compensation packages each year. The asymmetry is clear. House File 76 makes sure executive pay is appropriately funded by those who benefit from it, while preserving full flexibility for utilities to pay their top executives whatever they see fit. It is a targeted, reasonable reform that strengthens accountability and helps protect customers during a time of rising energy costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Weinman. Next on our list is Eric Lippman. Welcome back to committee, Mr. Lippman. Please go ahead and introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. My name is Eric Lippman of Utility Reform Now. And as it happens, both Representative Greenman and I are graduates of George Washington University. And as our basketball team will attest, we are both GW revolutionaries. And as good revolutionaries, we're both deeply concerned about highly compensated managers, suboptimal cost controls that beleaguer and immiserate poor people like Ms. Sorum and the other folks who are working poor in District 63B. We're arm in arm on that. Where we part company slightly is where we should begin on those issues. I frankly am concerned that a $3.5 million charge for a single permit, namely the permit to decide whether these 48 numbers on this notice are reasonable or not, we're going to be charged $3.5 million, as shown in the handout, in order to decide that question, whether that's fair or good, again, for folks like Ms. Sorum who are struggling. And so I absolutely agree that we have to lower costs. We have to be firm about overcharging. I'm suggesting, though, that legislators should focus on the folks who are directly under your oversight jurisdiction, namely the folks who are generating rate-making expenses like $3.5 million. So again, I think we should confront the costs and overcharging, but I'm suggesting that we start at East 7th Street before moving on to XL and Centerpoint on Nicollet Mall. Let's start in St. Paul before we move west. Thank you so much, Madam Chair and members.
Thank you, Mr. Lippman. Next, we have Jim Pearson with XL Energy. Welcome back to committee, Mr. Pearson. Please introduce yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair and Co-Chair Swedinski and members of the committee, I'm Jim Pearson with XL Energy. I very much appreciate the opportunity to share our perspective on House File 76 and continue our engagement in conversations around affordability. As we've discussed this session, affordability is a top priority for XL Energy, and we have a variety of strategies to help maintain affordability, including offering our customers a number of specific affordability programs. I think I'll sort of cut short a little bit about our use of the regulatory process. I think Representative Greenman and some of the other testifiers alluded to that. The process that we use when we submit a rate case in front of the Public Utilities Commission is a very thorough one. It looks not only at executive compensation, but it looks at every cost associated with our business. And the commission is ultimately responsible for determining what costs go in our rates and that our prices are deemed reasonable. So that is the process that we have used for 50 years. Other utilities use it, and one that, although I'm the company is on the other side of in many cases, but it's one that works quite well in our mind. I just wanted to provide a little additional context for today's conversation. Historically, the Commission has permitted only a small portion of executive compensation to be recovered from customers. For example, the Commission excludes at-risk pay, thus ensuring that the vast majority of executive compensation is already excluded from our rates, at-risk pay being bonuses, incentives, and the like. In addition, XL Energy serves across 8 states. For many of our executives, their compensation is also shared across multiple jurisdictions. This means that we generally ask Minnesota regulators to include only a percentage of the costs associated with our executive team. I also wanted to provide some perspective around how that team works to benefit our customers. Keep in mind, they bear the responsibility for safety, reliability, environmental performance, of course, affordability. But I'd also like to highlight some of the work that that team does to bring cost back to XL Energy, which benefits ratepayers or our customers. So examples of this would be around wind production tax incentives, which that alone has saved XL Energy customers millions of dollars over the years we've been engaged in that. And even the Form battery project that we heard about earlier today is another example of direct executive engagement that brought $70 million, 35 which million came to Minnesota. So this team is also the team that is really involved in some of those conversations at the national and at the national level and in Washington, D.C. So again, just wanted to provide that context for today's conversation. The last thing I would say is that even with today's amendment, the language still does not apply broadly, which again raises in our mind some equity concerns. So again, appreciate the conversation, appreciate the ability to share our perspective, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. And last on our list of testifiers, we have Jason Luce from Centerpoint. Welcome back to committee, Mr. Luce. Please go ahead and get yourself seated and go ahead and introduce yourself for the record and proceed.
Thank you, chairs, committee members. My name is Jason Luce. I'm the Associate General Counsel at Centerpoint Energy. My testimony will be brief here. I just wanted to note that in Centerpoint Energy's most recent rate case, the PUC approved a total of $428,000 for our 10 highest paid executives' compensation, which equates to about $42,800 per executive. On a typical bill, that compromises about 4/10 of 1 cent, or about 4/1000ths of a dollar. The current process requires the utility to prove executive salary recovery as reasonable and necessary for the provision of the utility service. This is where the Public Utilities Commission sits in a quasi-judicial manner, so it requires us to present evidence and prove our case. In this case, we believe it's a tough but fair burden, one that's worked for, as I believe the previous testifier said, 50 years, and we, again, are happy with the way that that the current process works. And with that, CenterPoint Energy appreciates the opportunity to provide testimony and can answer any questions.
Thank you so much. And with that, we'll go to members' questions and comments. First on the list, we have Representative Jones.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Rep. Greenman, for bringing this. I think, as has been stated, we have an affordability crisis here in Minnesota, and energy is top of mind for a lot of folks, including a couple of our testifiers. We can't live without energy in today's age, and so it's really important that when we're talking about a monopoly utility, that we're really holding their feet to the fire. I actually wanted to bring back up Mr. Lippman. I have a question for him.
And Mr. Lippman, please go ahead and introduce yourself again for the record once you get yourself situated.
May I put my materials away, Madam Chair? Representative Jones, how can I help? Eric Lippman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Lippman. So you had mentioned that we should be looking at things that are within our oversight. So just wondering, when we have a regulated utility model in Minnesota, does this body here not have oversight over the utilities?
Mr. Lippman.
Oh, Madam Chair, Representative, absolutely you do have. I just think a closer core responsibility is to be conducting oversight of the government officials involved. I think that's closer to the purposes of your election certificate, but I'm not doubting that under the Constitution and the commerce powers that you have ability to make the rules that you think are needful for a utility regulation, including the compensation given to utility executives. I just think it's more of a peripheral issue than the performance of the folks who work for us, whose salaries you and I pay.
Ms. Jones.
Yeah,
Or
thank you.
Representative.
Yeah,
My apologies.
thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lippman. So I appreciate that we do agree that this body does have oversight over these regulated utilities. And although it may be true that we maybe should look at some other pieces, that what we have on the agenda today is Rep. Greenman's bill, and we 100% have the jurisdiction to look at what is included in rate cases. And I think it is really important that we're not distracted by other pieces. And yes, those can be in other bills. But today, we need to be looking at executive compensation. And I think as we've been hearing from ratepayers, as we've been hearing from consumer advocates, it just doesn't make sense for ratepayers to be on the hook for these really large compensation packages. And I'll end with that comment.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members.
Thank you. And just want to give people a heads up. We've got about 8 minutes and about 5 questions or members. So first is Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Representative Greenman, the PUC currently does have the ability to regulate how much of this executive salary is being covered by the ratepayers. Is that correct?
Ms. Greenman.
Yep.
Or Representative Greenman. I apologize.
I'll take it.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
Representative Meckland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I've heard bills in here before that would have got kind of close to taking some of their regulatory effect away, or different things that we've heard over the years. Why is this one so important? Why wouldn't we just leave it under the guise of the PUC to let them regulate it?
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the question because, as we saw with the PUC case, it took 2 years to get to a decision for 2024. This is us doing our job as lawmakers and just setting a clear, bright line rule that applies not just to Excel, not just to Centerpoint, but Minnesota Power, Otter Tail County, Otter Tail Power, and Minnesota Energy Resources. And so I think it is a much easier call for us to just say, we're going to set a bright line rule. That bright line rules, we've already decided that the governor, our chief executive, makes what the compensation council makes. I think it's $177,000 now. And that's the amount of money we are going to allow ratepayers to be on the hook for, and not anything more than that.
Any follow-up, Representative Meckland?
Briefly, as a comment, Madam Chair. I find this, not that I disagree, we got to get money back to the ratepayer. I've heard Chair Swidenski bring this issue up year after year after year, and it's always shot down. So I find it kind of interesting for $4.26, or whatever it comes out to, when there's been offers of millions and millions going back to the ratepayer in years past, and unfortunately, that never made it across. But thank you, Madam Chair.
Next on the list, we have Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will try my best to be quick. Thank you, Representative Greenman, for bringing this forward. I just have a couple of things that I want to say. So first, this does impact ratepayers, and the fact that we don't get to choose who our utility providers are has a huge impact on that. I went ahead and looked up what the Thomson Reuters CEO compensation is, because that's the last Fortune 500 company that I worked for. Publicly traded business-to-business corporation, and he made $10.07 million. This is an international business-to-business corporation who made less than the CEO of Xcel Energy. And that business is a business that people can choose to go to, or they can go to a different business-to-business corporation. So when we're looking at CEO compensation, I think it's absolutely reasonable that we look at, energy companies have a monopoly, and when they are being paid better than CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, that's a problem. It's also a problem when private equity looks at an energy company and says, wow, this is such a great investment. They shouldn't be an investment that is so great that private equity wants to invest in this. Like, when we see that, we should automatically think that's a problem, because we're here to serve the people, not to make profit. The second thing I want to say, because I heard a little bit about how the CEOs are involved in so much important work and they're so dedicated and doing, lots of things, which I totally agree with. But doing the calculation, the CEO of CenterPoint makes 108.3 times more than the average lineman. 108.3 times more. That's an insane number. And I think we can all agree that while we support the CEOs doing these business deals and looking into investments, the reality is we need those linemen. We need the people who are actually connecting the people to the energy. Arguably, that is more important than the investments that are being made in innovation and energy storage, because I tell you what, I care a lot about energy storage. I've carried that bill the entire time I've been in the legislature, and I still would drop that bill in a heartbeat if it meant that I would not have connection to my energy supply, right? And so I think when we're looking at this compensation, it's really important that we think about where it stands within the greater scheme of our economic system, and also where it stands when people can't choose otherwise. I appreciate you bringing this bill forward, and I'm sorry for nerding out on numbers and doing calculations, but that's the way I process these things. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Greenman. And I appreciate a couple of members who withdrew their names. So final comment or question from Representative Swizinski, since we're getting short on time here.
Sounds good. Thank you, Chair Acom. And I would just remember, I appreciate the bill as it's written. It sounds like the PUC does kind of handle this when it comes to, executive compensation and rates. And I think there are a lot of things that we can do. It was brought up by Mr. Littman, like what are we available as legislators? What could we do to affect when it comes to the cost of energy? Representative Jones says there's a crisis in cost when it comes to energy. And we have the ability this session to put millions, if not billions, of dollars back into ratepayers' pockets by the decisions this committee could potentially make. Just the tax on casks, just a small little portion. There's $59 million sitting in an account right now that we could pass a bill out of committee and send it right to ratepayers in the next 2 weeks. And then there's $50 million a year that get refilled into that committee. Just one small tax on cask storage, which is carbon-free, which is the future of energy generation in our country. And I understand headlines. I understand gotcha votes. But the actual job of this legislature when it comes to the reaction between increasing cost in energy and decreasing cost in energy, when I've said it before and I'll say it again, we have the ability to get out of the way, to separate ourselves. You know, I think this is a very interesting bill, very debatable. I think it's interesting. I would potentially vote for the bill if I could have the votes to do that exact thing, to return $60 million. I would reach across the party line and pass this bill today if I had the guarantee from every one of these members in this committee that we could immediately put $60 million back into ratepayers' pockets and put $50 million each and every single year back into ratepayers' pockets. That's something we could do like that. But I have a feeling that's not the conversation we're having today. Whether it's property taxes, whether that's sales tax on energy, billions of dollars that this body puts on the cost of ratepayers each and every day and year across the state of Minnesota. So I like the idea of this bill, but if we want to effectually change the cost of energy, we first need to be willing to get out of the way. Thank you.
Closing statement, Representative
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the discussion. And the good news is if you vote for this bill today, it doesn't stop any of that conversation. This is a very simple bill. And it is a bill that we know will ensure that we are protecting ratepayers from the executive compensation that these private investor-owned utilities are making. You heard in this testimony today, the only people you heard saying this system is working is from Xcel and CenterPoint. You heard about comments from the public being concerned about this. You've heard about the PUC in their rate case and then going to court trying to limit it. And you have heard from members who all agree that we want to keep rates down. And so I think this is a good vote to vote with the people we have a fiduciary duty with. These corporations do not have a fiduciary duty to their ratepayers. They have a fiduciary duty, as you heard, to their investors. But it's our job to Minnesotans and to ratepayers who are going to pay these bills to protect them from being nickeled and dimed by the private investor-owned companies. So with that, Madam Chair, I'd love a vote. I'd love your support.
I renew my motion that House File 76 as amended be re-referred to the General Register, and the clerk may take the roll.
Chair Acomb.
Aye.
Chair Acomb, aye. Chair Swedzinski.
No.
Chair Swedzinski, nay. Vice Chair Kraft.
Aye.
Vice Chair Kraft, aye. Vice Chair Murphy.
No.
Vice Chair Murphy, nay. Representative Anderson.
Anderson, no.
Representative Anderson, no. Representative Baker. Representative Baker, no. Representative Buck.
Yes.
Representative Buck, yes. Representative Carroll.
Aye.
Representative Carroll, aye. Representative Hollins.
Aye.
Representative Hollins, aye. Representative Igo.
Igo, no.
Representative Igo, no. Representative Jones.
Aye.
Representative Jones, aye. Representative Lugar Nikolai.
Aye.
Representative Lugar Nikolai, aye. Representative Mohammed.
Aye.
Representative Mohammed, aye. Representative Mecklen.
Nay.
Representative Mecklen, nay. Representative Sexton.
No.
Representative Sexton, nay. Representative Wiener.
No.
Representative Wiener, nay.
There not being 9 votes, the motion does not prevail. Therefore, it will be laid over.